ملکہ حیا ہوں، میں ملکہ حیا ہوں، میں ملکہ حیا ہوں، سجاد میں زینب ہوں، میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا سجاد میں زینب ہوں، میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا سجاد میں زینب ہوں، میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا حضرت باقی سے یہ زین الباب بولے میں آنکھیں بند کرتا ہوں تو مقتل یاد آتا ہے سجاد حضرت باقی سے یہ زین الباب بولے میں آنکھیں بند کرتا ہوں تو مقتل یاد آتا ہے
میرے لال بتلا دے کہ میں سوؤں بھلا کیسے میری نظروں میں آ جاتا ہے ایک ٹوٹا ہوا نیزہ رلاتا ہے مجھے زخمی آنکھوں سے جب آنکھیں بند ہوتی ہیں تو یاد آ جاتے ہیں بابا، میرے بابا کا زخمی جسم تیروں پر معلق تھا، میرے رہتے ہوئے تشنا دہن مارے گئے پیاسے، وہ خیمہ جل رہا تھا جس میں بے ہوش تھا بیٹا، بڑی مشکل سے خیمے سے پھوپھی جان نے نکالا تھا، مجھے ہوش آیا تو دیکھا فضا میں تھے فقط شعلے، سکینہ کربلا کے بعد سوئی ہی نہیں باقر، وہ ایک دن مر گئی گھٹ کر کبھی روئی نہیں باقر، وہ رونا چاہتی تھی جب نہیں تھے مارتے درے، علی اصغر کمر جانا سرے مقتل قیامت تھی، میرے لگتے جگر وہ تیرے بابا کی شہادت تھی، ابھی تک یاد کرتا ہوں وہی منظر میں رو رو کے، تنے قاسم کا خون میں ڈوب جانا کیسے بھولوں گا، طیبہ میں اس لیے تھا وہ کہ پارا پارا لاشا تھا، بڑی مشکل سے بابا سے اس کی لاش لائے تھے، बस आशूर वो मैं शर रहा मैं कैसे भूलूंगा। मेरी नन्ही सकीना का गला रस्सी में जकड़ा था, निकलती थी कहाँ आवाज़, आखिर बोलती कैसे। मुबारक बैन कैसा था कि बाबा रो पड़े हाय, पितर रोते थे अपने लाल को सीने से लिपटाए। बयां इरफान कैसे हो क़यामत के मनाजिर थे।
نادي علي المظهر العجائب، تجده عونا لك في النوائب، تجده عونا لك في النوائب. كل هم وغم سينجلي بولايتك يا علي يا علي.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إلهي أتراك بعد الإيمان بك تعذبني، أم بعد حبي إياك تبعدني، أم مع رجائي برحمتك وصفحك تحرمني، أم مع استجارتي بعفوك تسلمني. حاشا لوجهك الكريم أن تخيبني. ليت شعري أللشقاء ولدتني أمي، أم للعناء ربتني، فليتها تلدني ولم تربني. أمن أهل السعادة جعلتني وليتني علمت، وبقربك وجوارك خصصتني. فتقر بذلك عيني وتطمئن له نفسي. إلهي هل تسود وجوها خرت ساجدة لعظمتك، أو تخرس ألسنة نطقت بالثناء على مجدك وجلالتك، أو تطبع على قلوب طوت على محبتك، أو تصم أسماعا تلذذت بسماع ذكرك في إرادتك، أو تغل أكفا رفعتها الآمال إليك رجاء رأفتك، أو تعاقب أبدانا عملت بطاعتك حتى نحلت في مجاهدتك، أو تعذب أرجلا سعت في عبادتك. إلهي لا تغلق على موحديك أبواب رحمتك، ولا تحجب مشتاقيك عن النظر إلى جميل رؤيتك. إلهي نفس أعززتها بتوحيدك، كيف تذلها بمهانة هجرانك؟ وضمير انعقد على مودتك، كيف تحرقه بحرارة نيرانك؟ أجرني من أليم غضبك وعظيم سخطك. إلهي يا حنان يا منان، يا رحيم يا رحمن، يا جبار يا قهار، يا غفار يا ستار، نجني برحمتك من عذاب النار وفضيحة العار. إذا امتاز الأخيار من الأشرار وحالت الأحوال وهالت الأهوال، وقرب المحسنون وبعد المسيئون، ووفيت كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إلهي إن كان قل زادي في المسير إليك فلقد حسن ظني بالتوكل عليك، وإن كان جرمي قد أخافني من عقوبتك فإن رجائي قد أشعرني بالأمن من نقمتك. وإن كان ذنبي قد عرضني لعقابك فقد آذنني حسن ثقتي بثوابك. وإن أنمتني الغفلة عن الاستعداد للقائك فقد نبهتني المعرفة بكرمك وآلائك. وإن أوحش ما بيني وبينك فرط العصيان والطغيان فقد آنسني البشرى الغفران والرضوان. أسألك بسبحات وجهك وبأنوار قدسك وابتهل إليك بعواطف رحمتك ولطائف برك أن تحقق ظني بما أؤمله من جزيل إكرامك وجميل إنعامك في القربى منك والزلفى لديك والتمتع بالنظر إليك. وها أنا متعرض لنفحات روحك وعطفك ومنتجع غيث جودك ولطفك فار من سخطك إلى رضاك هارب منك إليك راج أحسن ما لديك معول على مواهبك مفتقر إلى رعايتك. إلهي ما بدأت به من فضلك فتممه وما وهبت لي من كرمك فلا تسلبه وما سترته علي بحلمك فلا تهتك وما علمته من قبيح فعلي فاغفر. إلهي استشفعت بك إليك واستجرت بك منك أتيتك طامعا في إحسانك راغبا في امتنانك مستسقيا وابل طولك مستمطرا غمام فضلك طالبا مرضاتك قاصدا جنابك واردا شريعة رفدك ملتمسا سني الخيرات من عندك وافدا إلى حضرة جمالك مريدا وجهك طارقا بابك مستكينا لعظمتك وجلالك. فافعل بي ما أنت أهله من المغفرة والرحمة ولا تفعل بي ما أنا أهله من العذاب والنقمة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
يا رب العالمين 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 يا رب العالمين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
کیسا یہ قافلہ ہے، آہیں بھی قید ہے، آہیں بھی قید ہے، منزل کا کچھ پتہ۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد۔ امام سجاد علیہ السلام کے حال کے نوحے کے چند سلام کی صورت میں پیش کروں۔ ہائے بیمار کے پیروں میں پہنا دیے زنجیر، بیمار کے پیروں میں پہنا دیے زنجیر، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ کربلا کیا تیرا بیمار، کربلا کیا تیرا بیمار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ خون رو رو کے پکارے گا وہ اشام شام، خون رو رو کے پکارے گا وہ اشام شام، بے ردائی کا زادار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ کون لے جائے وطن ہائے سکینہ تجھ کو، کون لے جائے وطن ہائے سکینہ تجھ کو، کیا کرے بھائی بھی لاچار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ بے کفن لاش سے جا کر کوئی اتنا کہہ دے، بے کفن لاش سے جا کر کوئی اتنا کہہ دے کہ تیرا وارث تو گرفتار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ شرم سے اس نے جھکا لی ہیں نگاہیں ورنہ، شرم سے اس نے جھکا لی ہیں نگاہیں ورنہ، وارث حیدر کرار، وارث حیدر کرار ہے زنجیروں میں، کون یہ قافلہ سالار ہے زنجیروں میں۔ شہر کوفہ کی لرز اٹھی ہیں सारी गलियां शहर कूफा की लहरज उठी हैं सारी गलियां दिल दहल जाए वो झनकार है जंजीरों में कौन ये काफिला सालार है जंजीरों में
Hussain, Ya Hussain.
صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا ابن رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا مظلوم يا غريب كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما اللهم صل اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم واكرمنا بنور الفهم اللهم افتح لنا ابواب رحمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن علومك يا ارحم الراحمين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. My brothers and my sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih was sent into the Arabian Peninsula before he was born. From the time of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was banished by Nimrod, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told Prophet Abraham when he was in Palestine to go towards this area, this barren land, which we now call Mecca. And of course we know the famous story. He leaves Hajar and he leaves Ismail there. And Ismail cries for water. And Hajar goes between Safa and Marwa, trying to get water for the child. And then the miracle, where the spring of water erupts from the ground, and the birds flock to the water because this barren land had no water. When the birds were flocking towards the water, the nearby Arabian tribes saw this. Bani Jurhum, the tribe of Bani Jurhum saw the birds going towards the water, so they went there. And they found this woman and this young child, Ismail. And they stayed there, they settled in this land which we know as Mecca. And Ismail grew up in this tribe and he married from this tribe. And as generations past, Ismail's descendants were known as Bani Ismail, to the point where the man known as Hussain, who we mentioned previously, came forward and he began to take control of the Meccan economy, and he had the keys to the Kaaba, and he brought the descendants of Ismail to live around the Kaaba, and slowly they became known as Quraysh, because this is the gathering, taqrish. You gather, taqrish in Arabic means Quraysh. So the descendants of Ismail were Quraysh, and Rasulullah was born into this tribe who thought, the people in this tribe, they believed they were the people of God. Rasulullah was born into Quraysh, but he was not Qurayshi minded. Now, we look at how Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam went to the Arabian Peninsula for a reason. In the Arabian Peninsula, when Rasulullah was born into the tribe of Quraysh, it is an area where there are several different conflicting tribes. There is not one leading government. There is no one leading oppressor or tyrant who controls the land. When there is tafkik, when there is division, then it can easily be conquered. That's why Abraha, before Rasulullah came into the world, Abraha was destroyed. There was to be no main tyrant in the face of Rasulullah, as there was with all the prophets previous. How Nimrod stood in the face of Abraham. How Pharaoh stood in the way of Moses. Caesar stood in the way of Jesus. Here, there would be no one standing in the way of Islam. Rasulullah was able to freely propagate the... Of course, Rasulullah went through the difficulties of fighting against Quraysh, but in the end, Quraysh had to succumb to the power of Rasulullah, had to succumb to Islam. We look at what happened from Nabi Adam alayhi salam to Rasulullah, this mission, this godly mission that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent his prophets for. All of them upon the same mission. Yet all the prophets previous constantly faced this oppressor or tyrant, or they would have their religion become corrupted after their death. After the death of the Prophet, the religion slowly becomes corrupted, becomes led by the elite clergy and the royal families who change the religion, and their word becomes gospel, as this happened with the Byzantine Emperor Constantine IV, whose word became gospel, and the Christians upheld many massacres in his name, but he became the one who would control the religion. So then you see how this mission of prophethood kept facing a dead end until the time of Rasulullah. He was able to establish the government of Allah on earth, but not for very long. Because right after his death, the people wanted to leave Islam. What happens to Islam is the same thing as what happened to the religions previous, not by there being a tyrant in the way, but by the religion becoming corrupted from within. So then you start seeing how Muslims, they call themselves Muslims, they act like Muslims, they speak like Muslims, and they look like Muslims. But what they were doing was not in line with the principles of Rasulullah and the religion that he brought. They corrupted the deen from within. You see the evolution of the tyrant from Abu Sufyan to Muawiyah to Yazid, continuing to the point that now Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam was the key and the sword in this battle, which is why we mentioned that Imam al-Hussain is the inheritor of the prophets previous. He is the one who we recite Ziyarat Warith for, exclusively for him. And he is the lantern of guidance for what is to come, because Karbala was the climax of the change of trajectory of the prophetic mission. He was the one who inherited what came before and the one who was going to guide for what was to come. Now, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam did not face the tragedy of Karbala randomly. It was not a random massacre of a bunch of savages that came and destroyed the camps of the grandson of the Prophet and his daughters. No. Karbala was the battle that was taking place from Adam to now. From Adam to now. Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam stood his stand for all the prophets previous. That's why they all cry for him. He was the one who was going to make the final stand. The final stand. For Rasulullah was the final prophet, this final revelation, it needed the final protector, which was Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam. So he makes his final stand, and this is the culmination of two movements in the time of the Prophet, which were brewing, and in the time after the Prophet, they had brewed to the extent now they were two different nations. What do I mean by this? The religion had changed so much in the time of Muawiyah and Yazid that they had their own sharia. They had their own prayer. They had their own fasting. They had their own theology. They had their own fabricated ahadith. They had their own way of living and way of life and worldview and paradigm. They had the hadith, for example, to always obey the leader and whoever Amir al-Mu'mineen is, which is apparently Muawiyah and Yazid. And that even if this Amir was to oppress you or hurt you or harm you, you obey him. This was an ideology, fighting against the ideology of the Ahlul Bayt. The ideology of Imam al-Hussein carrying on the ideology of Imam Ali alayhi salam. These two were in conflict. And this is a very important aspect in order to understand what happened in Karbala, how it happened, why it happened, and what do we do about it now. Because if we understand it simply as a sad story, and that our Imam was oppressed, and that these people were savages, these are all true facts, but they're not the complete story. We have to understand Imam al-Hussein was standing up here. It was religion versus religion. It was to keep the faith alive. You know how they say, the Shia always say that Imam al-Hussein kept Islam alive? Yes, we say that. Because what was fighting against Imam al-Hussein at that time was trying to take over Islam. It was trying to destroy the divine mission from Adam to Abraham to everything that happened in the Arabian Peninsula to Rasulullah to everything, the Fatah. Now these tyrants come in and they took over. They corrupted the religion and they succeeded. They succeeded in taking it over. And they succeeded in making the people obey them. And they had very loyal followers, politicians, they had governors, they had scholars, they had poets, they had a whole range of propaganda, fighting against the theology of the Ahlul Bayt, our theology. And what I wanted to do in this session was to read all these ahadith and all these points surrounding the tragedy of Karbala for you to begin to understand the atmosphere and the environment of what was happening. So you see, when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam first was stopped in Karbala by Hur, he said to the people, and he said to Hur, the people in Kufa, he said they killed Muslim ibn Aqil wa Shi'atih. Muslim ibn Aqil and his Shia. That's what Abu Abdullah says. He uses the word Muslim ibn Aqil wa Shi'atih. What does that mean? That means there was a movement. Muslim ibn Aqil had a movement, fikr, a khat. And on the other side you have an ideology, a fikr and a khat. Khat Yazid, fikr Yazid. Ideology of Yazid and Muawiyah. It's a whole new deen. And then here you have the deen of the Ahlul Bayt, which they tried to keep alive, which this side was trying to eradicate. Imagine, they were trying to destroy this religion of the Ahlul Bayt, which is the religion of Rasulullah, which is the religion of the Quran. They are trying to destroy it. Imam al-Hussein says they killed Muslim ibn Aqil wa Shi'atih. In Karbala, when Zuhair bin Qayn came out to battle, what did the army of Umar bin Sa'ad say to Zuhair? They said, Ya Zuhair, we did not know you were of the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt. You see what they are insinuating with this question, with this statement? You of the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt, Ya Zuhair? This was an ideology, a movement, a faith. There were two movements and two ideologies at the time. Imam al-Hussein even stands in Karbala and he calls out to the enemy in one of his several sermons, And he says, Ya Shi'at Ali Abi Sufyan. He says, oh, the Shia of the family of Abi Sufyan. Why? They're an ideology. They're a movement. What happened to Imam al-Hussein was not an accident. They were trying their best to make an example out of Imam al-Hussein, to suffocate completely this faith and not allow anyone to come and speak this religion, this faith, propagated in the way of the Ahlul Bayt ever again. There were two movements now in the final battle. After the battle of Karbala, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that in Medina, there were only 3 Shia left. And one of them goes to the Masjid al-Nabawi and goes to the people and he shouts. And he says, لَقَدْ وَقَعَ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمُ السَّيْفِ. He says, the sword has now been struck between us and you. That's it. This is a dangerous statement. What's he saying? He's saying, now we have officially split. Now we are officially 2 nations. Now it's you and us. We're no longer one ummah. Your leader has just killed our leader. لَقَدْ وَقَعَ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمُ السَّيْفِ. It's on. You start looking at all these hadith and you start realizing at that time there was an understanding of what was going on. The Imam was alive. Muawiyah and Yazid wanted to take the leadership. That's why when I say that Imam al-Hussein was trying to take out Yazid, it's not for political leadership like dunya because of his passions. It's because he was trying to implement Deenullah. You look at Khudayr ibn Burayr, when he was in Karbala, when he went to battle, Afwan Burayr ibn Khudayr, when he went to battle, and one of the enemy soldiers in the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, you see, a lot of these soldiers, they knew each other. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't that they were just, an ignorant 30,000 warriors. They knew where they were going and what they were doing. They were upon an ideology. They killed Imam al-Hussein based on a principle. When they went to Burayr, and he said to him, Ya Burayr, do you remember in times previous when me and you were walking and you told me that Uthman was not the correct leader, and you said that Muawiyah was messing around as the Khalifa? And Burayr said, I remember. And so the man replied to Burayr, he said, Ashhadu annaka ala dalal. He says, I bear witness that you are upon misguidance. You see, they believed the theology of the Ahlul Bayt to be false and to be one that was going against religion, against Islam, what they perceived to be Islam. That's why when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the night and the day of, when he asked them to give him some time so he can pray, do you know what they responded? They said, is your prayer even accepted? Do you see? They had a different prayer. That's why when someone says that the Muslims killed Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they were not really, they were Muslims by name only. They were not truly Muslims. Because they had diverted from the path of Prophet Muhammad. They had the prayer of Yazid, the Sharia of Yazid. They had a whole new Sharia, a whole new movement. Imam al-Hussein was making the final stand. If Imam al-Hussein did not, then that's it. Everything that was done since the time of Adam till now becomes pointless. Islam is lost. The message is lost. It becomes pointless. Imam al-Hussein made the stand. You see how Nafi' ibn Hilal, he comes out to battle. He says, Ana Nafi' ibn Hilal al-Jamali. Ana ala deen Ali. He goes and fights. He says, I am upon the deen of Ali. A man comes out and fights against him from the army of Amr ibn Sa'd, and he says, Ana ala deen Uthman. And then Nafi' replies, Anta ala deen al-Shaytan. Look at the way in which they were talking to each other. He says, I was on the deen of Ali. The other one says, I'm upon the deen of Uthman. So then Nafi' says, you are upon the deen of Satan. You're following Muawiyah, you're following Yazid. You're following a whole different Sharia. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam kept calling sermon after sermon. He even said, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, if you look to an amir who goes against, he reminds them, Rasulullah said, an amir who goes against the principles of Allah and the Quran of Allah and diverts and is an oppressor and a tyrant, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him what he deserves. He's saying, don't merely obey anyone just because they are the leader. These are fabricated hadith. This theology that you're following is fabricated. But they weren't listening. They weren't listening. Here, there's this narration in Kufa from Amr ibn al-Hajjaj. He says to everyone, to the people before they go to kill Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he says, لا ترتابوا قتلوا من مرك عن الدين. Allahu Akbar. He tells them, be strong, have confidence, and do not fear to go and kill the one who turned his back upon Islam, Abu Abdullah. Look at the rhetoric. There was even this report, they would say, Al-Hussain fi Karbala qutila bi sayfi jaddih. Allahu Akbar. They say Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala, he was killed by the sword of his grandfather. They were trying to justify the massacre by saying and claiming that they were the true Islam. In the time of Nabi Ibrahim, Nimrod, he asked for the followers to gather wood so that they can burn Prophet Abraham. This would not have taken much wood to burn one man, one prophet. Do you know what the followers did? They ran and gathered a whole mountain of wood that was enough to burn 1,000 prophets. But Nimrod only asked for enough to burn one. Why did they go? They become loyal subjects to this tyrant. Muawiyah and Yazid were able to influence their adherents to the point that they convinced them through their propaganda and through their love of dunya. They convinced them to follow them and obey them to the extent they killed the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih. Then we understand why they went to trample his body. Why? Okay, you killed him and you beheaded him. But why trample his body? Why take his clothes? Why take his women and march them to the streets and burn their camps? Why? Because they wanted to make an example of it to everyone. Look at their heads on the spears. Oh, followers of Ali, this is your Imam. Never again speak his name. Never again speak the name of Ali. Never again. Anyone who dares to, this is what you will get. This is what you will receive. Imagine how, you don't think about how scary this is for someone like, imagine Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam just going through this, seeing this, the heads on spears. Imam Sajjad seeing their heads on spears. And he knows that he can't be killed here. He can't allow himself to get killed so he can carry on the mission. And he still has to create the foundations for this coming revolution, which he and Sayyidah Zainab did. How much did they have to go through? They were trying to suffocate this tradition. They were trying to completely finish it off to the extent that it would no longer be there. And this is, subhanAllah, they succeeded militarily. Why? Because then you see the Umayyads took over, then the Abbasid Empire, the Ottoman Empire, all these Muslim empires which a lot of Muslims look back at in a kind way. When you look at what had happened in those times, the injustices that occurred in the name of Islam, then you realize this was never the divine plan. This was never the divine plan. The divine plan was for Rasulullah, after he had completed his mission of Tanzil, to pass it on to the Wali, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He begins this government of justice and teaches the people their tradition, their true tradition. And he shows them the way. And he brings true Islam to the world. What happened was not this. Now, before I continue, I just wanted to answer two questions that people usually ask when it comes to Karbala. The first one being Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and who buried him. 3 days later, and we look at the different narrations that we have for the issue of the burial of the Imam, and we see that the one that talks about Bani Asad, the tribe of Bani Asad who ran away, who did not help in Karbala, they came back 3 days later, and they see the body of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. They see the bodies of the warriors in Karbala, and they bury them. However, this can't conceivably be true, because if you just imagine it, they come back into Karbala. They were not there on Karbala day, so they don't know who's who. And right now the bodies are without heads, and the heads are not present. They don't know who to bury and where to bury. And it's nighttime. So in the darkness of the night, and there's dust all over these bodies, how are they going to know this is Hussain, and this is Ali al-Akbar, and this is over there by the river is Abbas, and here is Habib? How do they know that? But the principles of the Shia, of the Ahlul Bayt, we have a principle that the Ma'soom cannot be buried except by another Ma'soom. And we have the narrations of a man coming to Bani Asad tribe in the middle of the night, and it is Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. He comes on a horse. And someone may ask, how, if Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam was in the dungeons of Kufa? And this is one of the mysteries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the miracles of Allah. Same miracles that we see in the Quran that are not hard to believe. If Isa can bring the dead back to life, and if Moses can split the sea, then Imam Sajjad alayhi salam can travel long distances in a very short amount of time, just like Rasulullah did with the Buraq from Mecca to Palestine and back in a couple of hours. In any case, the possibility of a miracle is not an issue for the believers in the Quran. What we're saying is that the Imam is not buried except by another Imam. So Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he's the one that comes and tells Bani Asad, here's Hussain, and here is Ali al-Akbar, the Abbas is there, prepare him here, let Habib have a grave by himself, and he's the one who puts Imam Hussain alayhi salam into the ground. Likewise, the question surrounding the head of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, we have several narrations about where the head is, and there are narrations that it is right now in Cairo, and that's where Masjid al-Hussein is built around, and those are strong narrations. And there are narrations that the head was stolen by lovers of Imam al-Hussein on the way, and then it was taken to Kufa and buried there. But the major opinion of the scholars of the Ahlul Bayt say that the head was brought back on Arba'in to the body and buried with the body. And that in the ziyarah, when we say our salams to Abu Abdullah, and there's a part that says go to the side of the head, they took that as an indication that the head is present there. And there is a narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam which says the head is with the body and the body is with the head, and they do not separate. I just wanted to make that clear because those are two questions that are often asked, and I wanted to include them in this session. But then now I carry on with my issue about the empires that took over. And we see these empires were cold-hearted empires. They were not the empires of true Islam. They were not the empire of tears. Militarily, they completed their objective. However, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam cultivated strength for generations to come, as we mentioned, through the school of tears. The school of tears, which I want to end this session about and make it clear to you what I mean. The school of tears, of the soft heart, of what the insan, what Allah truly wants insan to be. How can you not cry for Imam al-Hussein? How can you say, I don't cry for anyone? Don't you cry for your mom and dad? Are you a rock? Rasulullah, when he would hear the cries of the baby Hussein, when they lived as his neighbors, he would leave his house. He would feel anxious and knock on the door and says to Sayyidah Fatima, Ya Fatima, please stop him from crying. لا أريد صوت بكائه. I don't want to hear. I don't want him to cry. I don't want to hear the sound of him crying, because it made him cry. How can you not cry for the one that Rasulullah cried for? Such a nation does not deserve Rasulullah. The Arabs I have to say this, no offense to Arabs, but the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula were cold. They were cold-hearted before Islam. They would bury their daughters alive. They used to look at women and say, these women, all they are is just a burden. This woman is a burden. If she marries, her sons are in a tribe against my tribe. They're enemies. There's no love. They used to look at Rasulullah and be surprised when Rasulullah would kiss Fatima alayhi salam and kiss her children. Like, you kiss your daughter? And Rasulullah says, yes. Don't you? Rasulullah was emotional. He was someone who cried. You see these people, the Arabs, they didn't understand this. That this is what Rasulullah wanted. The hearts to be soft. To teach them love. Islam is love. Islam is ishq. Mawadda. Hub. Love. That's what Karbala is. Karbala is this way. It teaches you this. Karbala teaches you love and ishq. That's why we have it. The tears. It's Islam. But the Prophet, he passes away, and instead of this nation learning love, they turn away from Islam. And instead of them being taught true principles of love, they end up spreading their idea of this ideology of Islam to the world. And they take over Sham. And they conquer Iran and Iraq. And then they conquer Africa and Egypt. They go and conquer Europe. They reach Spain and France. This nation that does not know how to cry. And the ideology of the Umara was plaguing them. Instead of learning true Islam and love, they went upon the conquests. I don't look kindly to the conquests. Imam Ali was the flag bearer in all the battles during the time of the Prophet. Yet, the conquests, he was not present. You ask yourself, why? Why? What happened in the conquests? Imam Ali alayhi salam was not part of it, this empire. Here, I wanted to read to you some of the oppressive issues that occurred, the tragedies that occurred during the conquests. Here we see Musa ibn Nasir, the leader at the time. When he went into France, he brought back 5,000 French prisoners, enslaving them. This theology of slavery, taking them. Who are you to take free people? He went, enslaved them and took them. Took them back to Sham and sold them in the marketplace. 5,000 free men and women, sold them. This is your theology. Here we see Al-Ghazi Mahmud, here, who is called Al-Ghazi Al-Muqaddas to his followers. His time in the conquests in India was full of massacres, left, right and center, non-stop massacres. Till now, in India there is hatred towards Muslims because of what occurred in the past. Because of the injustice that these people, in the name of Islam, inflicted upon the people of India. Here, you look at how, even during the Umayyad Empire, they would go into tribes in Africa, Muslim tribes, and kill all their animals, kill thousands of sheep in order to get the baby lamb, baby sheep with the soft wool, in order to bring the wool back to the emperor. Imagine. They would go to the emperor and say, هذا الإسلام? هذا هو الإسلام? In the Battle of Jamal, only 36 years after Hijrah, the Battle of Jamal, Imam Ali alayhi salam is victorious. What do the people say to Imam Ali, his own soldiers? They say, Ya Ali, let us go and take the woman of Basra as prisoners, as our prisoners. Imam Ali, of course, says, no, you can't go and take the woman of Basra. They plead and plead and plead until he says, okay, fine. But if we're going to do that, then the first woman to be taken prisoner must be Aisha. Then they all stop. How can they take Aisha as prisoner? al-Mu'mineen, the wife of the Prophet, can take her prisoner? How? They stopped. When the Khawarij later on betrayed Imam Ali alayhi salam, he looked at them and said, what is it that you are so against me for? Why are you so upset and have so much animosity towards me and my path and my followers? They said, in Jamal, when you would not let us take the women of Basra, we would never forget. We will never forget. They held it against him. This theology that was prevalent at the time, that continues till now. We saw it recently, unfortunately. People massacring and killing in the name of Allah, and they'd hold their hand up like this. Astaghfirullah. So what was the mission? Right after Karbala, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam uses Karbala as the foundation of the school of tears, to show insan how to truly be an insan, how to have a pure heart and cry, and be strong, to have a heart stronger than any plane or bomb or weapon, or the heart that knows Allah and loves Allah, love Islam and love. And so he commits 30 years to teaching us how to love, these du'as that he writes, and Sahifa Sajjadiyya, showing us, cultivating this love and tears, buka wa du'a. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, after him, uses that foundation of love to bring knowledge and ilm. He brings in the sciences. Imam al-Sadiq fuses this, uses the love of Karbala and the scientific, the sciences, the Islamic sciences that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Baqir al-Ulum, brings in. And he fuses that, and he creates this path. And then people know this, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and his followers, they have so and so opinion. They say Abu Hanifa has this opinion, the Shafi'is have this opinion, and Imam al-Sadiq and his followers have this opinion. He sets them apart. Now we have our own path. And Karbala is that school of tears that grounds us, that makes us strong, that makes us a formidable thorn in the eye of every oppressor of every generation. Those who love Abu Abdullah alayhi salam do not fear death. Those who love Abu Abdullah alayhi salam make the final stand with him, that prophetic stand. Assalamu alayka ya Misbah al-Huda wa Safinatu al-Najat. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Sallallahu alayka ya Sayyidi wa ya Mawlai ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya Sayyidi wa ya Mawlai ya Ibn Rasulillah. On the day of Ashura, Imam al-Sajjad laid in his tent, hearing his companions and his family fighting on the battlefield. Every time a warrior was about to go and fight, he would go into the tent of Sajjad and say his goodbye. Before Ali al-Akbar went to fight, he comes into the tent of Sajjad and he holds his brother to his chest. Imam al-Sajjad wanted to fight alongside Akbar. Ya Akbar, defend father as if we are both on the battlefield. Forgive me, I cannot even stand. Abu Fadl sends his goodbyes to his nephew Sajjad. One by one, the warriors fall to the swords of the enemies. Imam al-Sajjad heard the small cries of the baby Asghar, his little brother. But then the cries stopped when the arrow pierced the neck of the small baby. Sajjad hears his father outside the tent. He hears him calling Abbas, Qasim, Habib, Akbar. I call you, but you do not respond. And how can you respond? هل من ناصر ينصرنا؟ Is there anyone out there to make the family of Rasulullah victorious? Imam al-Sajjad calls his aunt Zainab. Ya Zainab, my aunt, give me my stick in one arm and give me my sword in the other, and help me stand up. And she grabs him by the arm and lifts him, his whole body leaning on the stick, his sword on the ground as he drags it out of the tent. And Sajjad calls out, Labbayka ya Abata, Labbayka ya Aba Abdullah. Imam al-Hussain comes to Sajjad and sits him down. My son, you cannot go out, you must stay. He gathers the family and tells them, I am to go to the battlefield. I will not be coming back. Your Imam is now Ali Sajjad. He bids his farewell as they begin to cry. The final glance of Sajjad in the eye of his father Hussain, looking upon his eyes. And Imam al-Hussain tells him just before he leaves, بلغ شيعتي عني السلام. Send my Shia my salam. Oh Shia, when you drink the water, remember the dry throat of Hussain. ولعنة الله على قوم الظالمين إلى يوم القيامة.
सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीमार, सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीमार, कहते थे रोकर गम से गिरफ्तार। सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीमार, रिदाएं छीनी गई है सरों से ऐ बाबा, तुम्हारे बाद न समझा किसी ने ऐ बाबा। हक के तलबगार आबिद बीमार, सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीम। नबी की आल से लोगों ने मुंह को मोड़ लिया, हमें किस्मत ने यहाँ लाके कहाँ छोड़ दिया। हम हुए लाचार आबिद बीमार, सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीम। दश्त में लूट लिया, पानी को तरसाया है, हमें लईनों ने यूं दर बदर फिराया है। लुट गया घर बार आबिद बीमार, सैयद सज्जाद आबिद बीमार। ये कैद करके हमें लाए हैं बाजारों में, रसन भी बांधी है शानों में सितमगारों ने। क्या करे बीमार, आबिद बीमार सैयद सज्जाद, आबिद बीमार। लगे तमाचे सकीना के कहाँ थे बाबा, जब जला कुर्ता सकीना का कहाँ थे बाबा। नीले हैं रुखसार, आबिद बीमार सैयद सज्जाद, आबिद बीमार। छिनी सकीना की बाली तो कहाँ थे बाबा, पुकारा उसने तुम्हें जब तो कहाँ थे बाबा। मर गई गमखार, आबिद बीमार सैयद सज्जाद, आबिद बीमार। सितम जो हम पे हुए हैं बताऊं कैसे तुम्हें, बयान कर नहीं सकता सुनाऊं कैसे तुम्हें। मैं हूँ गिरफ्तार, आबिद बीमार सैयद सज्जाद, आबिद बीमार।
أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف سوء، 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف سوء. اللهم كل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أئمة البقيع ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس وأختك زينب وبنتك سكينة، السلام عليك يا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر، السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي، السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا مولاي وابن مولى، السلام عليك يا غريب الغربة السلطان أبا الحسن مولانا علي بن موسى الرضا، السلام عليك يا أختك فاطمة المعصومة ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
से सकीना की लगी है देर क्यों अब जिंदा سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
مدینے کیسے جاؤں اب وہ یہ بھی سوچتا ہوگا سکینہ ہے کہاں صغرا کو وہ کیسے بتائے گا بہت وہ سید سجاد پر مشکل گھڑی ہوگی
لپٹ کر رو رہا ہوگا وہ تربت سے سکینہ کی لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
عجب زنجیر ہے یہ دل پہ جو عابد کے لپٹی ہے در زندان کو دیکھے تو دھڑکن تھم سی جاتی ہے نظر چاروں طرف اس کو سکینہ آ رہی ہوگی
لپٹ کر رو رہا ہوگا وہ تربت سے سکینہ کی لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
در زندان کی جانب قدم اٹھتے نہیں ہوں گے بہن کو چھوڑ کر جانا گوارا وہ کرے کیسے مدینے میں مگر صغرا بھی رستہ دیکھتی ہوگی
لپٹ کر رو رہا ہوگا وہ تربت سے سکینہ کی لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
اندھیری قبر ہوتی ہے اسے معلوم ہے یہ بھی اندھیرے سے ہے گھبراتی بہت چھوٹی بہن اس کی یہی ہے فکر کے تربت میں کیسے روشنی ہوگی
لپٹ کر رو رہا ہوگا وہ تربت سے سکینہ کی لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
در زندان پر ہے منتظر سب قافلہ اس کا کہاں ہے سید سجاد کیوں باہر نہیں آیا سکینہ نے یقیناً قبر سے آواز دی ہوگی
لپٹ کر رو رہا ہوگا وہ تربت سے سکینہ کی لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں لگی ہے دیر کیوں آگے خزندہ سے نکلنے میں
جو اسرار سرانے کربلا شاہد نے لکھا ہے وہ محسن ہر گھڑی احساس یہ ہم کو دلاتا ہے بہن وہ کس قدر بھائی
से सकीना की